Well, good morning or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. Welcome. Odgers Berndtson are absolutely delighted to be hosting today's webinar, New Waters, Navigating the Trilateral Collaboration in AUKUS. Before we begin and introduce our three speakers, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and waters on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to extend that to other First Nations communities around the world, particularly in the 32 countries that Odgers Berndtson has offices. A couple of housekeeping things, just to notify everybody this event is being recorded. Towards the end of the session, there'll be an opportunity to ask the panel questions, and we'll invite you to put your comments and questions in a Q&A panel box. Just for your information, the chat function is disabled, so it's important you put it in the Q&A piece that you'll see on your screen. You can add those at any point and we'll collate them and then share them at the end of the panel discussion. I'm Julia Soutter. I'm head of the industrial practice in Australia and New Zealand, and I'm absolutely privileged to be part of our global aerospace defence and security team, headed by my colleague and co-host, Mercedes LeGrand, based in Washington. As this is a trilateral collaboration theme today, I also wanted to mention my colleague Claire Gatlin in the UK, who leads our practices across Europe and the Middle East. I know you all probably understand, but she couldn't make it. Finding a time for Australia, the UK and the US all to be on the same call is somewhat tricky, but I did want to thank Claire in her role in creating such an incredible panel today. Connection is one of our core values at Odgers. We value teamwork, and collaboration is key for us delivering our best skills, insights and creativity to our clients. And personally, I think our aerospace defence and security team does it exceptionally well. That said, I am very much looking forward to being in the UK in a couple of weeks' time at the Farnborough Air Show, so we can actually collaborate in the same time zone. Now, most importantly, onto the event of today, and we're so excited to have our panel members with us, so thank you for joining us. We have Ben Hudson, CEO of BAE Australia, Sam Lewis, Chief Global Officer at Growth Officer at QinetiQ, and Jessica Lewis, Assistant Secretary of this is a long title and I had to practice it earlier, of State for the Bureau of Political and Military Affairs in the US Department of State. Thank you all for joining us. We've asked each of the panel just to spend a minute or two introducing themselves and the lens they bring to this discussion, and then I'll hand over to Mercedes to lead the question and answer session. Maybe Jessica, if I could ask you to go first.
Sure. My name is Jessica Lewis. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Political Military Affairs. We are at the State Department here in Washington, D.C. I've been here for about 3 years, and before that spent about 20 years on Capitol Hill in various positions. And our bureau handles all of our arms sales and arms transfers around the world. So last year, we authorized about $80 billion in foreign military sales between US governments and other governments, and another $157 billion or so in commercial sales, meaning from companies to governments. We do a whole range of other things, but just to keep things brief here tonight, I will leave that here, and really just to say thank you to all my panelists and Julie and Mercedes.
Maybe I'll hand over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Julia. Ben Hudson, Chief Executive of BAE Systems here in Australia, and a member of the Global Executive Committee of BAE Systems. BAE Systems in Australia is sort of a multi-domain defence company, the biggest defence company by some measure in Australia, working across land, air, sea and cyber in particular. So about half our business is maritime, working particularly on the complex surface combatants for the Royal Australian Navy, and some foundational work with our UK team right now on the nuclear-powered submarines on AUKUS Pillar 1, and then a range of other activities across the business, including cyber, strategic surveillance through our Jindalee Operational Radar Network program, Joint Strike Fighter maintenance, Hawk, and a whole range of autonomous systems and guided weapons as well. So fairly diverse portfolio down here in Australia. Thanks, Julia.
And finally, Sam.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julia, and thanks to Odgers for hosting the event. Sam Lewis, Chief Growth Officer for QinetiQ. QinetiQ is a UK listed and headquartered global defense and security company. We've got a major footprint in both Australia, the US, and the US as well as the UK, about 1,000 employees or so in Australia. Most of our work there is in the test and evaluation assurance space, engineering services, consulting, and we do quite a lot of work on weapon systems assurance and systems engineering for the buyers of complex systems. And that's true in Australia and around the globe. Have a deep history in test and evaluation, training and mission rehearsal, and research and development. So really grateful to be here tonight. And in the context of AUKUS, we support all of those activities in the prospect of Pillar 2, and in particular across Pillar 2 with a lot of the enabling services that will enable that technology to prevail in both Australia, the UK, and the US. So thanks.
Mercedes, over to you.
Wonderful. Good evening, folks, or good morning, depending on where you are. Good evening from DC. Odgers is one of the best things about working with this company. Julia mentioned our collaboration is truly the privilege of being able to work with folks like Julia in Australia, Claire in the UK, and our amazing colleagues all across the globe, and to honestly to have access to the expertise of panelists like yourselves. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to do a little twist this evening and start our discussion actually with the future. So thinking about the future of AUKUS, and Jessica, I'll start with you. What are the long-term goals for AUKUS, and how do you envision its evolution over the next decade?
Thank you for that. And let me just, I think to talk about the long term, we also need to just take a minute and I want to talk a little bit about where we are and then where we're going. And so for those of you who don't live in the world of export controls like I do, I want to talk to you about what we've done to create a space where we can have license-free defense trade between and among the three countries who are in AUKUS. And we had to pass legislation. We're in the process of writing a new rule. Happy to talk through that if people have questions on those things later. But really the goal here is to do something transformational. AUKUS is supposed to bring us to generational change, not only when it comes to Pillar 1, but really what we're here to talk about for Pillar 2 is the next generation of weapons. And the real core idea is to bring together not just the companies, not just the governments, but also universities and the innovation hubs in these countries, with the idea that we can do sort of that the putting the parts together, when we put all of those pieces together, we can innovate and produce in ways that we could not do on our own. And so really the future of AUKUS for me is two things. One, we need to make sure that we do put that license-free defense trade in place in a way that creates surety for companies so that they know and feel comfortable when they're, selling a weapon or when they're moving IP, that it all falls under the rules of the game. That will enable that long-term environment where we can see the innovation happen. I'm happy to discuss more, but I think that's really the key piece for us here in the U.S. government, and particularly at the State Department.
Awesome. Sam, how does QinetiQ see this developing over the next decade?
Yeah, so I think if you just pull back and think about what AUKUS means to industry, it's really an opportunity to bring capability to bear specifically on the Pacific theater and building out what we'll call the allied partnership to secure the Pacific. And I think for us, we look at it as an opportunity for the governments to not kind of pour the same money down the same hole to arrive at the same conclusion at the same time. We think if the partnership succeeds in achieving its aspirations, it will result in each of the trilateral partners bringing specific capability to bear and then sharing that capability. And of course, the ITAR regime, being less cumbersome is a great enabler for that, sharing that capability so that we can develop at pace and scale equipment across the globe and bring, the 1,000-ship Navy to the fight, for example, right? So I think that is what we think is important. We love the opportunity to support each of the three nations in developing areas that they are going to take the leads on, and if we actually do that and achieve that goal, then it becomes a force multiplier for each of the countries in the partnership, and frankly, all allies who are interested in securing the Pacific.
Fantastic. Ben, is the way that BAE looks at this similar?
In some respects, but I guess I sort of take it up a level, where it's a pretty uncertain world we live in at the moment, and one of the great things around AUKUS, it starts with a partnership, and what is the answer that three great allies have together to the uncertain world that we face today. And there's a real sort of buzz across the entire enterprise, particularly in AUKUS Pillar 1, which is perhaps a year or two ahead of where the AUKUS Pillar 2 activities are. And when you get the privilege to work with both on the customer side and the industry side of nuclear-powered submarines, it's not normal business. It's a true mission focus. You don't see where the government ends and industry starts. It's a very rare situation, the partnership that we have there, and it really comes from that sort of foundational piece that those boats don't go to sea to provide the sort of security that we all hold dear, because they are the sort of ultimate large stick to hold over perhaps other people that might threaten the rules-based order within which we all live. But this true mission focus is really heartening, and Australia hasn't had the privilege in the same way to be part of some of these high technology programs on Pillar 1 in the past, and we're seeing all of that sort of pulled through right now, which is fantastic to see, and that comes with our capability uplift in the country, technology insertions, and a lot of opportunity for people. And why I was very happy to be part of this is people are at the heart of the AUKUS challenge, and how we cope with time zones, upskilling people, having that long-term focus to build industry across the nations to provide ultimately at the heart of AUKUS is simply the idea of providing asymmetric advantage to keep the world secure going forward. So yeah, AUKUS a great place to be, a great place to work, true mission focus, and yeah, it will come with mammoth challenges, no doubt, but yeah, everyone having a program first approach to it is really starting to pay some dividends across the nations at the moment. Thanks, Mercedes.
Thank you. It's a wonderful segue to the next question, which truly we all, our national interests are aligned, very closely. But at the same time, we are competitors in a global marketplace, and those are both realities at the same time. So I'm wondering, and Jessica, I'll pose this to you first. How do you balance the economic benefits with the national security imperatives with an AUKUS, especially when you're thinking about supply chain or advanced manufacturing or opportunities for, new technology development?
First of all, I think it's a really great question. And to answer that, I want to take one step back, which is that AUKUS is also happening at a moment in time when we are looking at our own defense industrial base in collaboration with those of our allies and partners, and really looking at how can we work together to address this really challenging national security situation that we all face from Russia's unprovoked aggression in Ukraine. Obviously, we have an ongoing war in the Middle East, the threats that have been discussed here in the Indo-Pacific. And we really see that production is deterrence. And when you look at what we're talking about in AUKUS Pillar 2 in that context, what you are doing is saying, how can we complement each other? There are certain capabilities that we may see Australia jumping in and taking the lead on producing. Maybe we will see co-production, maybe we'll see co-assembly. We've been talking about all the different co's in my world: co-production, co-assembly, co-development. But what AUKUS Pillar 2 allows us to do, because Australia and UK are our closest allies, we can then do some of the most sophisticated work together. I truly believe at this point there is more than enough work to go around to deal with these challenges. And I think the innovation that will come when we put these pieces together is an additional benefit both to the United States, our national security, and also to our US companies.
Awesome. Ben, what innovative approaches can enhance and diversify supply chains, and just sort of given the complexity of global markets, vulnerabilities, those types of things?
I mean, if I go back to sort of Jessica's sort of some of her opening comments on sort of creating this license-free environment, I mean, that is going to be the number one change. And when we look at just internally in the company and then sort of extrapolate that, what it means across sort of supply chains, to answer your question, we get quite excited about the collaboration possible, particularly with our BAE Systems Inc. team in the United States, and the great work that they're doing, where this sort of the government's talk and senior government officials sort of talk about the secret garden of ITAR, where ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, are the fence. And the move from the three governments to move that fence so that Australia and the UK are inside that secret garden, and it'll create a level of collaboration that we don't see at the moment. Or it's not a case that people don't want to collaborate; it's just very difficult because of TAAs and some of the licensing agreements currently required. It becomes a bit of an impediment. So we're tremendously excited about what that means in the company to create those asymmetric capabilities that will provide sort of Australia's allies, UK and US, but also that Five Eyes community and the extended sort of allies that we all hold dear, those key capabilities. And if we're excited about it in BAE, the collaboration then across companies through our supply chain, or between us and QinetiQ, as an example with Sam here, really creates opportunities we haven't had in the past. And to give you a really sort of a bit of a noddy example of how difficult ITAR can sometimes be, some time ago I was working in Switzerland and was part of General Dynamics in Switzerland, so US-owned company. And we had a military vehicle that had to go overseas on a trial, and it had a dome light inside, a bit like the light that you have in your car, in the roof of your car, and some differential seals. And ultimately, we missed a very significant opportunity because ITAR created an approval process where it took too long to get the approval to move that vehicle. And so you can't even sometimes ship something, move an article to be part of an activity. So this license-free environment, as that goes through, creates a bit of a burden, but huge opportunities both for companies like ourselves and across the supply chain to collaborate like we have never been able to before.
That is so interesting. And this morning, evening in the Middle East, or afternoon in the Middle East, I was having a discussion with one of our colleagues there, and an executive from a US firm operating in the region. And one of the topics was how, they are essentially having to create capacity and manufacturing and supply chain from scratch, and how it takes a lot longer than you think it takes. And we all know from COVID, how critical, a strong supply chain is. And one of the complaints there was none of the partners in the Middle East were collaborating. They're actually competing against each other for the same equipment, same, licenses, same products. And it didn't occur to me in that conversation, and I don't think it occurred to any of us, that might even be a challenge between our three countries, the UK, the US, and Australia. And yet, of course, with the best intentions and legislation, and other things, it is. So Sam, I'm wondering, how do you envision collaborating with other AUKUS partner companies and, the Five Eyes defense community in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, in the industrial construct, we team together all the time to deliver weapons, services, solutions. So that teaming construct, that ability to work with other companies exists. It generally occurs in the country where you're delivering. So I think the difference here is really taking advantage of not only the regulatory environment that that people like Jessica are so ardent about working and making easier, but it's also taking advantage of the technology environment and actually getting from different security domains, right? And how you move data across different security domains now that you have a license free, or the fence around ITAR is encompassing all three countries, and perhaps even on some enabling technologies, it can be extended to additional countries, which has been something that folks have talked about. So I do think it's about taking advantage of the technology to move data across multiple domains. We've spent a lot of time in the industry thinking about digital twins and digital threads. How do you distribute manufacturing to places that have capacity to manufacture for you? Well, you do that by the exchange of digital data controlled in the appropriate security domains, and inside the boundaries of that, broader fence around the partnership of the trilateral partners, or in fact, if you extend it for certain technologies to other partners. So I think it's just about taking advantage of all that technology, the teaming constructs, how do companies partner together. That already works. We just have to get it expanded and get the box expanded to include the partner-to-partner relationships, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think it's, it sounds pretty easy on the surface. And of course, the devil's always in the details. You mentioned, all of the sharing of information and digital aspects to this. So obviously that brings up a question of computing power and security. And so, Ben, I would ask you, from BAE's perspective, how are you as an AUKUS partner collaborating with others to, accelerate development and deployment of emerging technologies like, those supporting technologies, AI, quantum computing, et cetera?
It's a really good question, because we often get focused on pillar one, but sort of pillar two, and maybe to sort of set the scene and just a bit of a reminder, pillar two is a group of technologies that potentially provide asymmetric advantage for allies. And you'll hear sort of cyber and cyber warfare capabilities in that box. Artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence has been tagged with autonomy right now, because AI is a technology, and what warfighters really need is battlefield capability. So AI going hand in glove with autonomy, and really multi-domain autonomy, space to seabed, including cyber, in that sort of area. Quantum, and I think when I always look at quantum, it is the sort of great promise, but we forget that quantum is already in our daily lives through quantum clocks that have fundamentally impacted all of our lives, but also the application of quantum sensing and quantum clocks is far nearer to us than quantum computing. Undersea capabilities, a lot said again about pillar one, but when it comes to integrated undersea surveillance and some of the technologies around undersea autonomy, there's some absolute game-changing things happening across the countries at the moment. And the last one, long-range strike, has sort of been grouped together now with hypersonics and counter-hypersonics as well. And I guess I just sort of outline all of that, the opportunities here. For me, the pillar two elements, there's going to be lots of collaboration, but you've sort of mentioned it right at the start here. One of the biggest challenges of AUKUS is the time zones across the three nations, because it is really difficult. And it's something I get to live quite regularly with my colleagues. We're a global company, and I get both the privilege but the heartache of joining calls from midnight till 4 a.m. Several times a month as we try and split that time zone. And for people like me, you sort of acknowledge that that's part of the job if you want to have a truly global job, but you can't ask that of all your employees. So when it comes to collaboration, some of the people aspects, this is going to be some of the biggest challenges, I think, more so than some of the technologies. And if I was to sort of propose my own sort of crystal ball to think about where Pillar 2 and collaboration will look like in the future, I think we will see a range of bilateral relationships that the third partner may then leverage on maturity. So some great work happening in the US right now on hypersonics and counter hypersonics, which Australia is collaborating with the US on. Those technologies that come out of those bilateral relationships may well then be picked up by the UK or vice versa. But equally, I mean, just to wave the Australian flag for a second, it probably looks like to some of the partners that Australia, there's a sort of a one-way valve where technology is coming to Australia. Australia has a lot to contribute as well. We've been working on hypersonics down here for 13 years. And we've got already some burgeoning relationships happening between the governments on some of the work there. We've got a 5-decade lead in a very important strategic surveillance capability in the Jindalee Operational Radar Network, or JORN, right now, which will see sort of thousands of kilometres against some of the new threats when you think about some of the AUKUS pieces here. So I think brave new world. I think there'll be a number of bilateral relationships when we sort of look back from what that 10-year view looks like. But the other piece, the economic piece to this is it's not a competition. Because of the threat and where the world is right now, there's a real sense among industry that's currently working on any AUKUS activity that sort of rising tide floats all boats. So no one that I can see is focused on, well, where's my bit of it from a company perspective? Where's my value add here? Because we all acknowledge, first and foremost, the mission focus and the national security element is absolutely paramount on the program.
That's awesome. And you know, Jessica, from a policy perspective, when you're thinking about, you know, all of this technology transfer and access to IP, you know, I'm sure it makes a lot of folks nervous, and it's a big deal to sort of open things up this way. What considerations are being given to cybersecurity? Is it a priority? Is it sort of considered a vital piece of this to protect, you know, our IP and advanced technology? You know, how are you all looking at that?
It's a really good question. And one of the things I think has been particularly great about doing this with Australia and the UK is we also looked at, I'm going to take that question and kind of look at it in a couple of different ways. One is that we all are looking at our export controls and making sure that all of them are providing those protections for our companies, because and our warfighter, because we understand that protecting that information, one is you know, the basis of what companies have done, and they have done the work to create a new weapon or a new capability. And that needs to be protected. And two, we need to make sure it doesn't fall in the wrong hands and then gets used against our own warfighter. And so we really looked at this is now we are going to have shared standards on export controls, and that helps protect everybody. So I think that's the first piece. I think the second piece as part of that is we're going to have and this is all being worked on and in the process of being completed as we speak, is a shared understanding of exactly who's going to receive these. So we know that when we're transferring an item or IP, that it is going to a what we call an approved community, but fundamentally companies, universities, institutions that we already know and trust. And so I think that is the basics that we need to have in place from a regulatory perspective. What you're adding in, which I think are also other components, is how do we manage this from a cybersecurity perspective? I think the good news with both Australia and the UK is that we already have really robust programs in place, because we do a ton of classified work already with each other. The companies in front of you, I'm sure, can speak to this in even more detail, but we already have a whole host of not just regulations, but a host of ways of making sure that as we pass classified information back and forth, it remains secure, that the facilities are appropriate, that people are vetted who are coming in and out. And so again, because we're working with the Australia and the UK, and we already have this trusted relationship, I'm very confident in our ability to secure the information. The last thing I will say on this is you always have to remain vigilant. And so there is no foolproof system. And we will have to keep innovating in that space too, because clearly there will be actors looking to use AUKUS as an opportunity, and we will need to stay vigilant there.
Ben and Sam, Jessica, thank you. Sam, what is QinetiQ doing around, sort of ensuring the integrity of its IP, of its partners, of national security data?
Yeah, sure. So great question. So we've got a number of internal projects on to continue to move up the value chain of securing our own information and technology. We've got several projects working bilaterally between the UK and US and UK and Australia, where we're already, as Jessica mentioned, we're already, trading at the secret and top secret level information and data, and that's all done with proper licensing and controls in place, of course. But that does take a long time to get in place, and it is arduous. So any release and relief of that is quite helpful, but it doesn't reduce the burden to protect it. And in fact, what I think is most important is, and to kind of build on a point that Ben made, is that it's not a one-way valve from the US and UK into Australia. It's a trilateral partnership where technology is being moved across, originating in each of the home markets or countries and moving across borders. And I think that realization then creates more demand and pull to put industrial capability and capacity into the countries that you're trying to sell your solution or product to. And you can only do that by fundamentally first securing your IP and protecting the government's portion of that IP. And it just comes down to good practice that we all know how to do, good practice and investment in the underpinning technologies. We can't let ourselves get so excited and move so fast that we then don't keep that underpinning technology layer and assurance layer supported.
You mentioned earlier, Sam, before we kind of got started, T&E as a particular area of interest. We're sort of segueing into the talent aspect of all of this, which obviously is mine, Julia's, super interest area. What is QinetiQ doing there? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think if you were to pull the leaders in kind of the Pillar 1 arena, and Ben mentioned, Pillar 1's 1 or 2 years ahead of Pillar 2. Pillar 2 is really just finding its feet and kind of getting attention and really starting to get to hang some wins on the trilateral trophy wall. But if you look at that, QinetiQ has invested over the last 4 or 5 years in building T&E sovereign capability in Australia. And how we do that is what we call our T&E Sovereign Skills Program, and it applies to any set of skills. This one happens to be T&E, but we can do it, and others can do it on any kind of skill base. You're starting to see it in the submarine community as well. But what we do is we take and second Australians into programs where they can learn the skills on the job, and also in practical exercises and in training courses and classes. And we do that for 9 months, 12 months, depends on the skill that they're learning. Then we return them back to the Australian market to then go work and take those new skills and capabilities into projects and programs that they're working on behalf of the Commonwealth, for example. So I think those kind of programs start to build industrial capability and capacity where there hasn't necessarily been a demand prior, and there is now demand, given the AUKUS trilateral partnership. And I think that is a model really for every industry to look at, and or every segment of our industry to look at, and think about how we're going to put and increase the capability. Because of course the number one limiting factor is investment and talent in the people that are going to do the work where we need the work to be done. So that's what we're focused on, and I think it's proved out to be successful for us, and we're starting to see it picked up by others in other segments of the market as well.
Awesome. And you know, obviously a constant sort of stream of conversation with my and Julia's colleagues around the globe is very frequently, you know, how do you balance the needs of, you know, the needs of nations, right, to build a sovereign capability with the needs of businesses to earn revenue, with the needs of, you know, governments to secure their citizenry, and so I'm really curious, Jessica, to hear what you have to say. Is anyone, you know, is anyone in government planning for talent management? I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, within the defense sector, to meet the evolving demands, you know, of where we need different talent in this partnership.
Sure. And I actually think, like some other questions, that question clearly goes beyond AUKUS, because as we talked about before, we are really, and this new national defense industrial base strategy and this whole co-production question and how we're going to work with other countries to make sure we all have the weapons and capabilities we need in this security environment involves not just what we've been talking about it in terms of, you know, do we have enough TNT, or do we have enough energetics, or do we have enough whatever it may be? We need the human beings to do the work. So that is a little bit outside of my particular expertise. So I will share what I know, but with the caveat that my bureau doesn't handle that piece. But what I will say, and I would love to hear from Ben and Sam on this, is that both the US and other countries are really looking at some changes that we saw happen during COVID. And the story that I hear often is there was a generation that left companies during COVID, sometimes in the engineering space, sometimes really in other parts of companies. And now companies are in the process of regrowing and retraining that community. And on the US side, we have to do all of those basics, develop more engineers, have more people who can jump into these companies, people who can work the lines. In other countries, I've also heard we have companies that are, I was in Turkey recently, and a Turkish company explained to me that they've literally set up their own engineering school that is actually next door to their company. And they are training the sort of next generation of engineers and pulling from they managed to do this in a very prestigious way. So kind of pulling the best of the talent. So again, this is outside of my area of expertise, but I do know this is something that is being thought about across the US government. And I know that companies are thinking about it as well.
Ben, how are you and BAE thinking about this? What new strategies or initiatives are you all implementing?
We're in I guess, a slightly privileged position, being a larger company and sort of when you're a smaller company. I've been part of smaller companies in the past, and you've more or less got to rely on universities, technical colleges, others to create the workforce that you can take or recruit people. But the approach, and particularly again, AUKUS Pillar 1 approach, but not just there, is we're looking to grow the pipeline and having a very strategic approach. So we've invested money in years 4 to 6, so kids less than 10 years old, when it comes to STEM outreach programs, and a program called STARS here in Australia, which sort of focused on our Indigenous community, and another one related to technology for schools in partnership with state governments across Australia. There's a lot of research that people sort of start to select what they want to do long term in that sort of 4 to 6 year area, and particularly some of the sort of societal backgrounds that we have in nations like Australia. At the moment, we only have 12% of our engineering graduates are female. When you look at India or Israel, it's almost 50-50. So there's a big societal piece to that. I think we're losing a lot of very smart ladies to become doctors, lawyers, or work in great companies like Odgers, perhaps. So I need some more great females to become engineers. So we're right at the front end there. And then as we sort of move forward, we're partnering in the latter half of the latter stages of high school around our regions. So we've just last year opened a new technical college with Findon in South Australia. And really that is then on working on the sort of technical college side to help create that pipeline and get kids sort of focused and almost job ready in sort of the year 11 and 12. So we're not streaming everyone. And I still think that from, again, a societal perspective, I think a lot of kids still have that pressure from parents, families, that they feel like they haven't made it if they don't go to university. And honestly, I'd use Australian terminology on this call, but I'll keep it sort of a little more less Australian. I think it's unfair if someone thinks they haven't made it because they're got a fantastic trades background. And we have about 40% of our workforce in the trades area, and absolutely phenomenal people. So we're leaning in on that piece, and then we're also creating our own skills and knowledge academies. So in Barrow in the UK, we have the SASK, the Submarine Academy of Skills and Knowledge. And post high school, we take kids into that essentially. They're still kids when they start at sort of 16 years old, and they get their technical skills in welding, in electrical trades, but very relevant to building a submarine. So in the first year, they have their security clearances. They're really mission focused, and one of the things we really see across some of the AUKUS technologies is there's a real need for culture as well as skills. And so building the right company culture, that mission focus, the alignment on things like security, so that if there is a problem in a business, then it's actually the employees calling it out, whether that's a cyber issue, whether that's someone at the front gate that shouldn't be there. So the cultural build is part of it all as well. And then right throughout people's careers, the delivery in a company like ours on leadership training, technical skills training, upskilling. And look, it's a constant frustration, but also an acknowledgement we must be doing something right in BAE, because I'm constantly approached by parts of my team when people are getting recruited out of BAE Systems Australia into companies like Anduril and others, that we are doing something right here. So I guess it's sort of from
not by us, Ben, not by us.
No, I know, but it's from year 4 more or less.
Uh-oh. Ben, I think we lost you. We'll let his internet connection catch up to his idea there. You know, Ben, or Sam, turning it over to you from a member of the defense community, a company member of the defense community, what do you feel that we can be doing better to enhance trilateral collaboration? You know, part of this is taking advantage of the different strengths across the globe in our respective regions. You know, but part of this also is about our collaboration. So talk to us a little bit about you know, what you feel we can be doing to enhance that.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? I mean, it will underpin the success of the AUKUS trilateral partnership. And fortunately, as Jessica mentioned earlier, we've been collaborating on a number of things for a long time, right? I mean, if you think about in nuclear submarines, the US and the UK have been collaborating for 50 years on nuclear submarines, right? So we have a good track record of collaboration. I think getting the security protocols, getting the security protocols more easy to use, where people aren't afraid to collaborate, right? Oftentimes people hide behind, a barrier of security because they're afraid to make a mistake. And a lot of that comes down to collaboration and communication and understanding. And the more that we can, again, expand that fence where there won't be the fear of making a mistake, it will enhance collaboration. I also think there's a number of things that are occurring in kind of co-government, co-industry forums, right? You think about the Advanced Capabilities Industry Forum as an example, or AIA as an example. These are industry associations that have significant participation and support from the trilateral partners governments to create opportunities to workshop and go out and do work streams together that are advancing how we're going to work together and how we're going to underpin all of the pursuit of the pillar 2 enablers with the technology appropriate and the controls, security controls appropriate, and the communication paths that are appropriate, and allowing government and industry to come together in those forums. And it's costly to do, right? We have to travel as industry participants. Government has to travel, right? But allowing people to come together in those forums is a great way to start to build the relationships that will allow us to get over those hurdles that would be previously not jumped just because people are afraid of security barriers or don't have the pool that they do by connecting in these forums. So I think the communication amongst the forums is really paramount, and having our governments continue to set the standard that they encourage this exchange is really paramount, because that will then force companies to do it, because we want to get the knowledge, we want to get access, and we want to make sure that we're able to support what our customers are actually demanding of us. So again, I think just that continued support for in-person, when possible, collaboration between government and industry is what will help unlock the power of AUKUS.
It almost sounds like a little bit of a chicken and egg conundrum. There obviously, collaboration is critical. And so I'm curious, just from your perspective, do you feel that, the key to unlocking the success of AUKUS lies more on the side of government and policy, or more on the side of, industry co-creating and co-collaborating?
I mean, I think the real answer is we have to do both, because I think you said something earlier. The way our defense industrial base works is that the government creates demand signals, whether that's a service coming out and saying, hey, we need a new capability, and who can develop it, and or sometimes something will come out from a creative space in industry and be brought to the government. Like, they're all different ways. But the truth is that our defense industrial base serves our warfighter and serves our national security interests. And so we can't operate in isolation. And I've been thinking about this actually a lot. I think when this is relevant to this question, but an earlier one, where for us to get this right, when we're working with more than one countries, you have to have the government, in this case, creating the regulatory environment that allows the collaboration to happen, and the different governments creating demand signals saying, hey, when we look at our national security and what our warfighters need to be able to do, here's what we need. And then industry has to come in and say, oh, okay, yes, we see this, and there's a business case for what you're proposing. Companies, and I don't work for one, but you all can explain this better than I do, but companies have to see a business case to produce something in a particular location or to develop it. And everybody's going to have to take a little risk here, and everybody's doing something new in this space, but the end goal is worth it. And so you have to put all of those pieces together, both in sort of when we look at maybe the using hypersonics in the first collaboration. So both in sort of individual projects, but also over the long term. My theory of the case, which is going to hopefully be proved correct, is that we will need a few of these test cases to get out there and do it. And then once you do that, we'll see kind of where the kinks are in the system, so to speak. And the next time around, it'll get easier and better. I just think that's the way all of this works when you are trying to do something new and innovative that requires collaboration. But I think that it's worth it.
Awesome. Thank you, all of you. I know we do have some questions from the folks that are listening in. Ben, welcome back. Sorry that we lost you there.
I thought it was quite funny that we were talking about cyber just before, and my computer did that. So I took a photo of it. So, Hopefully,
They're always listening. They say the machines are always listening. No worries at all. Julie, over to you.
I was going to say, we've got about 10 minutes left. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in from our audience. But if there are any other questions, just a reminder, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you just type your note in there, and then we can share them with the panel. But thank you so much so far. It's been absolutely fascinating, and we really appreciated your insights. So our first question is, will there be a balance between the AUKUS members on funding? It seems that Australia are spending significantly. Will the US and UK purchase technology and capability from Australia? And how will that balance be struck? Not dissimilar to the NSPA and balancing of the spend allocation amongst its members. Who would like to take that one first?
They did mention NATO. I don't know. Maybe Jessica, that's fresh in your mind.
You're on mute, Jessica. While Jessica's working that out, I would just offer, if you look at Pillar 1, right, there's balance in, buying Virginia-class submarines and then following it with SSN AUKUS, right? So there is clearly an interest in a level of balance. And I do think it will be incumbent upon the government to say, what can we best rely on Australia for? What can we best rely on the UK for? And that will create, if you put a demand signal into those markets where they have expertise or additional capability, or perhaps capability that leads in the trilateral partnership, that does then will create balance. But back to Ben's earlier point, a rising tide does lift all boats, and there is so much to go after here. And our peer competitors are, have a different, economic model that they can, spend differently and command the economy the way that we cannot. Therefore, we're going to have to rely on all parties, and it's going to eventually, of course, naturally spread itself out. I would offer.
Sure, and I just to add to that, I guess what I would say is, just to be clear, AUKUS is not NATO, right? Like, NATO is an alliance which has a whole governance of it. For example, an attack against one is attack against all. There is a whole just completely different, that is a treaty alliance that is backed up by a sort of rules of the game, to use the simplest terms. What AUKUS is actually about innovation and collaboration on developing the next generation of weapons. And in Pillar 1, obviously, that has to do specifically with the sharing and working together on nuclear powered, conventionally capable submarines. So it's not a matter of cost sharing, right, in the way that sometimes NATO is talked about. So what I think here is to talk a little bit more about Pillar 2. Really, what you're talking about is developing new weapons or new capabilities that governments want to purchase. And that's why there has to be both the business case for the companies, but on the sort of back end or front end, depending on how you look at, the US government has to say, we want to buy that because we think it's of value to our warfighter. And the UK and Australia have to do the same. And then if we want to export it outside of this community, we will also be looking at that as well. So I just think the fundamental premise is different, equally as important, but just it's a different mechanism.
Yeah, and maybe I just very, very quickly. I mean, I've been for 20 years slightly frustrated on the balance of trade in the defence sector between Australia and some other nations. You have to acknowledge, though, Australia is a smaller country by some measure industrially than the UK or the US. But very interestingly, right now, sort of counter to that sort of thought is, let's look at AUKUS Pillar 1 just for a second. So there's more than 70 years, 7 decades of investment by both the UK and the US on nuclear-powered submarines. And yes, Australia, if you look at a very short-term view of it, Australia's making some investments in nuclear reactors through Rolls-Royce and the production capability in the UK, and the uplift of providing a contribution to the uplift in in industrial capacity in the US. But if you then step back and apply the 7-year decade, those two investments of around $4 billion each seem very small considering the investments and the leverage Australia will get from those, the technology and investments over 7 decades. And the second sort of point is Australia will punch above its weight. Of that, I am sure. We have some very unique capabilities in Australia around things like strategic surveillance, where we've invested more than 5 decades of work and already have systems operating in the US in terms of over-the-horizon radar, which we don't really talk about. But there's a couple in the public domain, so you can have a look at that, and I can mention it here. We've got the GhostBat unmanned combat aerial vehicle that's been developed by Boeing, and we're a strategic partner in all the autonomous capabilities for the base platform. The flight control systems come from BAE here in Australia. And that has been, again, in the public domain, is being looked at by the US Air Force as part of the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program, which sits under NGAD, the Next Generation Air Dominance Program. So there are some other classified things that are happening between the countries, but Australia, I think, will punch above its weight given the size and scale we are, and find a healthy balance of trade within the AUKUS partners.
We have a question that is coming through about expanding, AUKUS and potentially having, a 2-tier system with New Zealand and others. But I'm going to skip that for a moment, Ben, because I want to stay on the topic that you just raised. And another question that's come in is, how is each country or multinational prime, in the case of, some of the companies, how are they going to protect their sovereign supply chains and mature capabilities that are already independently in service, or production across multiple countries?
I mean, I'll answer it really simply, back to what I said before, and this is a team effort across the nations. If we take a protectionist approach to supply chains rather than which is the sort of cup half empty approach, rather than the cup half full approach, and have a positive and proactive partnership approach, we will fail. And so very simply, protecting sovereign supply chains is the #1 aim of this. National security and providing the asymmetric capabilities our nations need is #1. And then back to that point, with so much investment going through the AUKUS activities, which wasn't contemplated a few years ago, all boats will rise. All supply chains will win. I mean, I know that's a very big statement, but there is so much work here. No one company can execute it. When you hear sort of BAE talking with Huntington Ingalls, for instance, we talk as partners, even though one's working on Virginia and one's working on Astute and SSN AUKUS. We don't talk to each other as competitors in any way, shape, or form, and that's what we need across all of our supply chains as well, essentially.
I'm very conscious we're running very close to time, and part of me's just looked at the clock and can't believe that it's gone so fast, because I've been hanging on every word. I think there's a couple of other questions, but I think possibly we should think about wrapping up and saying thank you to our panelists and everybody for joining us today. And perhaps with the outstanding questions, we will collate some notes around this conversation, and we'll possibly put some answers back on those questions that people have shared and that we haven't got to. But I just wanted to say on behalf of Odgers Berndtson, thank you so much, Jessica, Sam and Ben, for agreeing to participate today and joining us from various spots around the world. And I want to thank our team as well in the background, and they're sitting at the top, but the amount of energy and effort that's gone into the coordination and getting the technology to work and the marketing to flow has been exceptional. So I wanted to thank our team, but also your teams, because they've been great in connecting all the dots and getting everybody here today safely. So just on behalf of my team here in Australia, thank you so much, but I'll hand over to Mercedes for some final comments.
Likewise, I think the discussion has been absolutely fantastic. We had a lot of additional topics we wanted to cover, and there's a list of questions here and on our WhatsApp chat offline that we're not going to be able to get to. So to the audience, we're sorry that we're not getting to all of your questions. There is a lot still to talk about and to figure out here. So as Julia said, we will follow up with a summary document. We'll try to brainstorm offline how to answer some of those questions that were unanswered and see if we can get that out to folks. But thank you all so much for joining us this evening, this morning. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks for everyone online. Have a great day.